Well, welcome back. I'm so delighted to see so many of you still here. We are at our last panel, and I think you've heard a lot of unbelievably interesting ways of framing the kinds of challenges that we are facing. But I think with this last panel, part of our goal here is to talk about how to actually decarbonize the built environment and to show you some ideas that are emanating from MIT and also to bring in industry approaches. So I have 4 people on the panel, this last panel. Leading and moderating it would be Juan Palacios, who is an assistant professor at Maastricht University and also a visiting assistant professor at our center. But he has been spending the last 2 years as essentially a postdoc researcher at the center and contributing to our educational curriculum and our research. His research is focused on environmental economics, sustainable real estate, health economics. He's currently focusing on the effect of indoor air pollution on individual productivity and health. So you can tell us whether the air quality here today was helping us digest all of this interesting information. Next to him is Kent Larson, who directs the City Science Group at the MIT Media Lab. His research focuses on developing urban inventions that enable more entrepreneurial, livable, high-performance districts in cities. His projects include advanced simulation and augmented reality for urban design, transformable micro-housing for millennials, mobility-on-demand systems that create alternatives to private automobiles. Next to him is Clay MacFarlane. I've had the delight to actually get to know Clay because he was a student at the MSRED program, not just a few years ago. And so his trajectory after he's left here has been remarkable, and congratulations, Clay. He is now a principal on the climate technology team at the Fifth Wall, which is the largest venture capital firm focused on global real estate industry and property technology. Clay focuses on climate tech investment, capital markets transactions, and strategic partnerships. Before he went to Fifth Wall, Clay worked at Blackstone in New York, focused on distress, special situation credit investing across industries and asset classes. Now, finally, Eric Bradley is the managing director of Taurus Investment Holdings, which is a industry partner to the center. He leads Taurus's effort in clean energy delivery and high-efficiency energy consumption for new and existing real estate, overseeing the EcoSmart Solution affiliate and Renew Communities subsidiary, and leading Taurus's ESG policy and energy transition programs firm-wide. Before joining Taurus, Eric was at Shell New Energies, where he was responsible for standing up their global distributed energy services business, and where he set up EcoSmart JV between Shell and Taurus. So you can see we've assembled an incredible panel to conclude this conference. So Juan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kairos. Thank you, Kairos. Thank you, Denise, James, and everyone that made this conference possible. I have the honor to be here, the last moderator, and also be a little bit of the person in between you and a great weekend in sunny Boston. Big pressure. You asked me whether the air quality is going to affect the cognition of the audience. Listening to me is a stress test. So that's just to start from there. But I'm really, really happy also that they let me be the last one and let this panel be the last one, because I think that is going to touch upon a lot of the things that we have heard about in the World Real Estate Forum this year. Issues around circularity, technology to reduce operational carbon has been pop up all the time over the last 2 days. And this is going to be a session that is going to give us the overview of what is the potential to reduce carbon using the built environment, using technology, using policy, and also taking into account regulation and other type of forms, financing, and so forth. So hopefully it's going to be a good wrap-up. We have designed the panel to do its best to do so and brought the best people that we could think of to do it. So we are going to provide an overview of what is possible, and we are going to get into what is business attractive how do you finance all of these things, and also what is technologically feasible now, but also with feasible in the room and MIT, we actually can not only look at what is feasible now as of today, but what will be feasible in the next months and years to come. That's what we want to send you home, with an optimistic view and a realistic view of what is going to be feasible to see and be implemented in the built environment when it comes to fight against carbon emissions and to save this planet. So with this, I'm going to give it to Kent, who's going to give us an overview of what is possible.
Great. Thanks, Juan. Thanks, Kairos. I want to start with a number, 2.5. I think this is one of our most important numbers for the planet. This is 2.5 tons of carbon per person. The yearly average carbon budget for every person on the planet through 2050, if we're to have an 80% chance of limiting global warming to 2 degrees Celsius. I mean, we just took the carbon budget that the climate scientists have established through 2050, divided it by the number of years we have left, 27, and dividing that by the number of people on the planet. All right, this is another number, 17.19. This is what I calculate this area consumes per person. So a long ways from 2.5. And Kendall Square is much better than most cities in the US because we have good mass transit, et cetera. So how close could we come to 2.5? And we just picked 2030. So for this, we built a climate model. I'm not going to go through all of this, but just to say that it allows us to run scenarios about all the different interventions that we've identified and see the impact on energy consumption, but also on the social, economic, as well as the environmental performance. Now, this is a thought experiment. So what we did for this presentation, just crank everything up to 100%, although this allows you to run different scenarios. So we start by decarbonizing the grid. We just took the Massachusetts roadmap, which is fairly aggressive. What would that do? So that number comes down to about 15.81, okay? So that didn't save the planet. Then we looked at the commuting to and from. 42,000 people work in Kendall Square, about 9,800, I think it is, live here. We said, what if everybody that commutes in drove an electric vehicle? Okay, 100% electric vehicles for commuting. What does that do? That brings it down to 15.5. And we also then can look at what that does, the economic, environmental, social. If you heard John Oxendorf this morning, he talked about basically these three as being critical. So very little economic and social value to that. Hybrid work. I thought this was pretty interesting. Okay, so we all learned how to work remotely. What if half the people in Kendall Square at any given time worked remotely? And we modeled that, and we saw it had very little impact because it turns out people use more air conditioning at home, they drive more locally, so the impact was very small. And of course, almost no social and economic impact. Then we said, what if we completely deep retrofit every building in Kendall Square? Okay, sensors, thermal insulation, high performance HVAC, et cetera. Now, we're looking at both embodied and operational energy. So you replace all these systems, you're introducing a lot of embodied carbon, but then you're reducing the operational. What kind of impact does that have? And a little bit better, that takes about a ton out of the emissions for everybody per person. And you can get some pretty good social impact, better ventilation in particular. Then we said live-work symmetry. What if all those 42,000 people actually lived in the district, built housing for all those people? This is our Cityscope model. By the way, if you come by our lab down on the 3rd floor, you can see through the glass. We have a whole series of these. We like to use the optically tagged Lego bricks for community sessions because people can just play. But then we can get feedback as to the kinds of issues we're talking about, emissions and social performance, et cetera. So what does that do? That has actually a pretty huge impact. And not just environmentally, but now you can begin to see the social and the economic impact. People living near where they work, more physical exercise, stronger social ties, innovation potential all goes up. But then we still need to bring in the amenities. So if you can bring in the walkable access to all of the amenities people need in daily life, and we like to use telecom data to actually reveal the assets that people use. And by the way, everything with an X is not available in Kendall Square. So if we brought all of that into Kendall Square, you then, again, achieve some pretty significant savings on the emissions and pretty significant social economic values as well. Hyper-efficient housing. So very little housing in Kendall Square. What housing here is luxury housing, almost no housing for families or for the young people that work in all the startups. We, for many years, have been working on transformable apartments, so a small apartment functions as if it's bigger. We launched a company some years ago, Ori Living. This is an apartment we have in New York in Hudson Yards, so a walk-in closet on demand, office on demand, the bed comes down from the ceiling. By the way, we have funding from both IKEA and Google to take this to scale in Series C funding now. So we're pushing this pretty hard. What does that do? Remember, the buildings are already high performance. You know, a lot of this depends on what order you do it in. But we have pretty good emission savings, but it's really increasing the equity and the diversity, the density in the city where you get the biggest impact. Okay. Lightweight mobility. So we've effectively eliminated commuting, so we don't need cars. So now we've been working on these lightweight community scale autonomous vehicles. On the left is the persuasive electric vehicle. On the right is an autonomous bicycle. You call for it like an Uber. It comes to you. You take it to your destination and then set it free to pick up the next person. By the way, you can see prototypes of this down in the lobby that we built some years ago. Okay, so that reduces emissions significantly. Also some pretty good impact in other dimensions. High density power. So we covered all of the rooftops with photovoltaic in the first step. That gave us maybe 15% of the required energy for the district. So we're very interested in high density community scale power. This is the design for a fusion reactor that MIT is commercializing with Commonwealth. And I'm very interested in fusion-ready cities. I think these small modular reactors can be a transition to that. We bring those into the community and some pretty good environmental savings, but almost no social and economic benefit. Plant-based diet. The average American diet is way above 2.5 tons. So diet alone is more than the total. One floor down, we built our city farm some years ago looking at aeroponics. I think there's all kinds of innovation, lab-grown meat that we can look at. Now we're down to 5.9. So that's pretty aggressive. That's maximizing all of these. We still didn't get to 2.5. So now we have to do other things like, and we have perfect circle in terms of the environmental, social, economic benefit. So now we have to decarbonize air travel and improve manufacturing and decarbonize the grid, things like that. We're not working on those. But the point is, in that bracket, these are all the things you can do locally in a community. Things that can be done bottom up rather than waiting for top-down government action. And I think it turns out that's where the greatest impact is. So that's a summary of what we're looking at. I just want to mention, because Kairos brought it up earlier, I think the path forward to achieve this is all about zoning. It's about creating incentives for the real estate developers and the infrastructure companies to build out in a pro-social way. And maybe that's something we can talk about if we have time.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. So this is a great opening of the panel today, and actually makes me very happy that the Center for Real Estate has Kairos, because without planning, we are not going to solve this issue at all. If you see it, like the big catch of these donuts, came down to make better planning, as you say, and better zoning. And if we have the best technology, but we don't put it in the right places, and we let people still behave as they are doing now, it seems that we are getting still a very big donut that doesn't get to 2.5. But we do have a lot of potential for making buildings more efficient, and a big cut of that donut was to make those buildings in Kendall Square be more efficient. But that requires a lot of work, a lot of capital, and is not often easy to do. So Eric, can you walk us through how we can make those numbers a reality in those buildings?
I will, and I did some quick math. You had me doing some per ton, per capita numbers, so I'll share that with people as well. So thanks for keeping me on the spot. So hi everybody, I'm Eric Badley with Taurus Investment Holdings. We're based here in Boston. We're a global private equity real estate company. We have been in business in our current form since 1997, but actually our roots go back to the mid-1970s. We're in the United States, we're in Germany, actually where we started, we're in southern India, and then we're also re-entering the UK market. We have about 130 employees, 45 of them are investment professionals. They actually do deals, we do new build, we do renovations, value add renovations, focused on industrial, and when we call industrial, we're talking about warehouse, logistics, last mile delivery type facilities, and a lot of multifamily. I think what makes Taurus very unique in the industry right now, what attracted me to Taurus, is we have a team of 20 professionals who come from a traditional energy or engineering building background. And those professionals are in two of our subsidiaries. One is called Renew Communities, which I'll talk a little bit about, that does renovation, so deep energy retrofit renovations. And then we have another company, EcoSmart Solution, which was how I came to know Taurus, that builds geo-exchange thermal microgrids for communities. And we've launched the first community scale geogrid in Austin, Texas, what we call Whisper Valley, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So in terms of relevant experience on the energy side and kind of getting things done, we've installed 6 megawatts of solar, which actually in the grand scheme of things is not a lot, but for the portfolio that we've done is actually pretty significant. We've actually renovated and are in the process of renovating over 3,000 multifamily units in the United States, and we've also are in the process of upgrading 1.2 million square feet of industrial space. And then I've mentioned EcoSmart Solutions. So we operate 4, you could call them private water utilities, although we're not a utility, but 4 private geothermal microgrids. We have two more coming on in Florida. I'll go through that in a couple of minutes in the first quarter of next year. And then we have 2 more that we'll probably start construction on in late 2024. Serving a little over 1,000 customers by the first quarter of next year. So let me jump to the next slide. Talk a little bit about Renew Communities and what we do. So the technologies that we're deploying are all readily available. There's nothing. We're not using nuclear reactors. We're not using any kind of advanced photovoltaics. Although we're always looking at what technologies we can deploy. But I think what makes what we do unique is we're able to combine financial incentives, financial structuring, local policy, and then which technology combinations will allow us to get to the energy reduction and the carbon reductions we want, while also being accretive for our investors. So we're not doing this for charity. The projects that we've done, we've actually been able to make them accretive, and one of the projects that we're very proud of that we're in the process of wrapping up is a 1970s vintage workforce housing in Fall River here in Massachusetts, what we call our South Winds project. It's been profiled quite a bit. It's over 400 units, multifamily. And we took a building that was all electric, 180 HERS rating, and a typical kind of an average house is 100 HERS, for those of you not familiar with that rating system. So we took 180 HERS and went through renovations and brought the HERS rating down to in the 30s range. And I'll show another slide that talks about what does that mean from a carbon intensity perspective. But the technologies we used are all off the shelf. Building shell insulation, new high efficiency appliances, heat pumps. These are air source heat pumps that will operate in low temperature environments down to -9 degrees Celsius, and also rooftop solar. So this is all off the shelf equipment. We spent about a little over $13 million. We did get some state and local incentives of about $4 million. And at the end of the project, we were able to reduce energy consumption in the building, all electric, afterwards by 80%. So very significant reduction in energy. And what we're really pleased about is this was financially accretive. It actually added over 200 basis points to the returns for our investors. And on exit, when we look at the NOI improvement for this property, it's about $800,000. So you put a typical cap rate on that improvement, it's about $20 million of value enhancement for a $13 million investment into the property. So very, very significant improvements. What we found was interesting as well is not only the financial and the energy benefits, but just the living environment. I went into one of the properties about a year ago that had just been renovated, and you go in and there's no noise. You don't have outdoor condensing units. You have no air pollution because everything is electric and it's coming from the grid. So it's a very quiet environment. And when we think about, for workforce housing, this is giving people a better living environment and a much more stable and lower electricity bill, which we think is really important. So where it really matters, we're able to have a good impact on the community. The other thing that we watch very closely, for those of you that are not familiar with the CRREM pathway, it is an organization out of the Netherlands that has taken the net zero pathways and converted it to real estate. And so what we do in all of our deals going forward is we look at any improvement that we're making to see where does it fit on the CRREM pathway. So the green line shows, in order for you to get to a net zero pathway on carbon intensity in real estate, what do you have to be each year to be effectively in compliance? And it's done on a kilowatt hour per square meter per year basis. And so what we did is we took our South Winds project that I just described, showed it as pre-retrofit, and we said, after we've made all of those improvements, where does that land us on the CRREM pathway? And it takes us out early 2040. So we've added 20 years of property, basically the property value for this system we've added through the improvements that we've made. And the nice thing about what we've done is we've only installed 1.2 megawatts of solar, which is really not a lot. There could be more things that we could do over time. We expect solar prices to come down, battery costs to come down, which I know will be talked about in a minute. So as we're holding this property, if we do decide to hold it longer term, we can add more solar into the system. One of the other things I should have mentioned that we're also doing, which helps with our investors, is we're measuring in real time what every property unit is consuming. So not only the common areas, which many real estate companies can get access to through the utility, but through sensors, we're able to see what every unit is using. And that allows us to watch total energy consumption for the property, but also monitor for any problems with any of the property equipment. So that's South Winds. EcoSmart, which I mentioned, is the new build community. So we've launched in Whisper Valley, Texas, which is about 10 miles south of Austin, Texas. We're actually not very far from the new Tesla Gigafactory that was put in. We have a few Tesla employees that live in this community. It is about 900 homes right now. When it's fully built out, it'll be 7,500 homes. Single family to own, single family to rent, and some multifamily, and a little bit of mixed commercial. What we put in here, which is very unique, is what I mentioned earlier, is the geothermal microgrids. We have 4 microgrids in operation as we speak, able to serve 900 homes. And we're able to take the energy consumption down compared to how you would build traditionally in the Austin market, which requires all electric operation to begin with, 50% below. So we're able to build houses. We actually have a HERS certificate for one house here. It's a 7 HERS. That's probably one of our best designs. We take a 7 HERS rating. So we're almost at a net zero score, a little bit of consumer behavior, a little bit more solar panel installation, we could take this close to net zero, actually down to a 0 HERS rating. And that's very, very achievable. The way we approach the design here is we start with building envelope, and we start with the HVAC equipment. And of course, in Texas, very high cooling loads. And so through the geothermal system, we're able to take the energy consumption down quite a bit. We're able to save 36,000 tons per year. So that's about 10 tons per person or per house in this community. So putting it in the context of the prior presentation, what we're able to do. When the whole community is built, at the end of the 7,500 homes, we'll have 25 megawatts of solar. So pretty significant, call it power plant on the property. So we're really proud of how that's going along. This is all hard work. It's not easy to do. That's why we have the professionals on the energy side to make this all fit together. But it's definitely scalable. We absolutely believe this technology and what we did, the package for South Winds is scalable. And finally, one of our last properties using the EcoSmart technology is our Novo Avian Point project. This is a new build multifamily property in Apopka, Florida, which is right outside of Orlando. It's a 276 unit apartment that will actually go online in the first quarter of next year. We're able to eliminate, in this case, we're showing over 800,000 pounds of coal. This has a slightly different technology than what we're using in Whisper Valley. We're actually using the aquifer in Florida. Florida has an aquifer system underneath, and so we do once through cooling with our geothermal loop, and then we have all of our heat pumps that are tied into it. So it brings the capital cost down quite a bit. So this is a partnership with TPG, the private equity company. Looks like we lost the picture. Oops, let me go back one. There we go. So on this particular property, we're using the once through geothermal cooling technology. We also have solar. We're actually using another technology for this property that allows us to partition the solar across customers as they're using it. So if we have one unit that's not using any energy, then the solar gets routed to another property. So that's a pretty cool technology. It'll be fitted out for electric vehicle charging over time. We're estimating probably at the end of the decade, this property will need probably 20 to 30% of the parking spaces for the tenants would need to be EV charging capable. So we're always, as we're putting these properties in, we're always looking at how do we put the cabling, any substation upgrades that we can do so that when the time comes, we can put the charge posts in and work with our EV charging vendors. So I'll stop there. We can take questions later.
Thank you, Eric. So we went through a lot of procedures and interventions that you can do at the district level, at the building level, and the common denominator has been their technology deployment. So, Clay, floor is yours to understand what Fitwel does, and then we open the conversation here to see how we get this done.
Perfect, thank you. It's actually a really good setup into what I'm going to talk about a little bit here. And just one thing to note, not every real estate owner operator looks like Taurus. I interact with very few actually who are so forward in terms of energy consumption, both on the embodied carbon and the operational carbon side of things, and to be able to measure it and have metrics like that is actually very commendable. So I'm glad to see that you guys are doing that. I think what we deal with more often than not actually is reluctance to adopt technologies. And our job is a lot of the times to educate real estate owners and operators why they should be adopting technology, and specifically for my group, climate technologies. So Fitwel was founded about 7 years ago. It was born out of the realization that the real estate industry and the technology industry were on a collision course, and neither really knew how to navigate the disruption. Historically, real estate companies are very difficult to sell into. They're decentralized, and it's very difficult to figure out exactly who should be the point person for a particular product going into a building. Likewise, technology companies are multiplying by the day, and it's hard for real estate companies to figure out where the differentiation is, where the product is, and frankly, just how to find these companies that they want to adopt and use on a commercial scale as part of their operation. So Fifth Wall was founded initially focused on real estate tech, so technology that helps building owners and operators buy, lease, sell, and operate their buildings more effectively. We have grown that strategy and now launched a climate tech strategy, which we launched about 3 years ago. And that was out of demand from our LPs, many of whom themselves are real estate owners and operators looking for decarbonization tech. So today we have about $3 billion under management with these two strategies. And the differentiator for Fifth Wall is that half of our committed capital comes from real estate owners and operators. So if you look on the right here, select strategic LPs include Hilton in the hospitality segment, Kosan, British Land, Kimco, Prologis, Lennar, et cetera. So we have LPs, over 112 strategic LPs today that represent basically every vertical across the real estate industry. We are talking to them monthly, if not weekly, if not daily, trying to figure out where their pain points are in their business so that we can go find them technologies. When we do go out and seek these new technologies, we often come back to them, have them kick the tires with us and help us diligence them. And then in doing so, try to find the best solution. And likewise, if a solution is good for Lennar, it's probably good for a lot of other home builders too. So we can turn around and use our distribution network to push the technology out into the industry. Just to give you a little bit of sense of size and scale, we have about 3.8 million multifamily units represented in that strategic LP base, about 3 million hospitality units, about 200,000 single-family homes being built every year. So there's a lot of volume that we can bring to all these portfolio companies, and we help them push their technology out into the world. We've already covered this. I won't. It's just another way to look at sort of why real estate. 40% of CO2 emissions, 40% of energy consumption, 40% of raw materials use, but only 5%. This says 6, but it's actually less than that. It's 5% of funding into climate tech has actually gone towards real estate solutions. So what does that ultimately mean? If you were to take 100% of the technologies that existed today and fully deploy them across the real estate industry, you'd only bring down the carbon footprint by half. And so that tells us that there are a lot of other technologies out there that need to be developed and brought to market to be able to bring the full real estate footprint down to zero. So that's where we come in. A lot of the businesses, a lot of the technologies that have been talked about thus far are sort of beyond venture backable. So they're in the market already. Once they've got stable cash flowing business, they can go find capital in the public markets. They can go find capital from banks. We are looking for more frontier technologies and technologies that can return sort of outsized returns, but which are also sort of at the forefront of technology innovation. These fall into two categories which have been touched on already: embodied carbon and operational carbon. I'm happy to get into sort of examples of these as we go. But some of the companies that we do invest in, include companies that are working on material substitution, so alternative construction materials such as brimstone, which creates carbon sequestering cement. Building electrification, Turntide, which has hyper effective electric motors, which sell into HVAC, but also automotive end markets. Loop is one of our EV charging businesses. We actually went out and looked at over 200 different EV charging companies, used our LPs to run an RFP and distill it down into one, and that's how we selected Loop. Roadrunner is a circular economy recycling tech software and marketplace for multifamily owners and operators, and Assembly is at the forefront of componentized and modular construction. Anyway, would be happy to talk about any of those, but that's the end of my prepared remarks.
Thank you, Clay. So what I see from all of you is that there is a huge portfolio of technologies out there, a huge portfolio of interventions that you can do at the district level, at the building level. And I would like to get from you a sense of prioritization, a sense of how we think about low-hanging fruits, things that are very difficult to implement versus easy to implement. Out of all of those cats in the donuts that we saw, out of all of those technologies that you list, can we think about which ones are really a no-brainer now versus the ones that are harder to implement, the ones that are really profitable, the ones that we should really keep investing? Can you give us a sense of not giving people 10, 15, 50 technologies to go home, but if they have to remember one or two interventions, which one should they be thinking of that? Apart from trying to forget the horrible moderator that they have to.
Well, maybe I'll start that. There are all kinds of amazing technologies that we can tap into, but I don't think the problem is fundamentally technological. I think it has to do more with settlement patterns. I think we completely got off the rails, particularly after World War II developing in an autocentric, distributed way, and zoning kind of reinforced all of that. And so I think the low-hanging fruit is to, I mentioned earlier, is to rethink zoning, to move towards a much more dynamic, incentive-based zoning that makes it profitable for developers to build in a pro-social way. And you know, I talked about housing near jobs and walkable amenities and large and much smaller spaces and developing communities that aren't reliant on cars. Now, it's interesting, if you look at, like in New York City, the 1916 zoning ordinance, almost overnight, all buildings were stair-step back, you know, so zoning can be very powerful. Then in 1961, they put in plaza bonuses. So almost overnight, every building had a plaza. And so I do believe that with the right incentives, we can transform communities pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yesterday, we got the head of the city planning department here talking about what it will take to repurpose office buildings. And then he said, if we just look at financial indicators, the capex and so forth, we still are very far from the value threshold that it will take to transform offices into multifamilies at the scale. But if we look at those numbers and if we look at the environmental benefits of bringing those people close to their jobs and so forth, maybe we actually have another view on transforming those offices. Maybe it's actually the moment to rethink Manhattan and actually try to bring some of those people back to the city centers. Eric, anything to say around those lines?
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious one inside the building, if you're not doing it right now, is lighting, LED lighting. Yeah. And the paybacks are so quick, and so you can typically fit it into tenant improvement budgets. Yep. I think anything insulation, anything energy efficiency that's not changing the mechanical systems, which I would say would be the next thing to look at, that should be what you're looking at in every building as a start. It's absolutely the low-hanging fruit. It's not glamorous, but it absolutely has impact.
Mm-hmm. And Clay said that you guys are very special. I agree. That's why I was super happy to have you in the panel. Yeah. What do the rest get wrong, or what do the rest of the industry need to think differently to look a little bit more like Taurus when it comes to investing in these technologies?
Well, you definitely have to go beyond, you know, the obvious stuff that I mentioned. You've got to have professionals on the team who can speak real estate, so they understand what do the LPs want. They understand the split incentive that I'm sure has been talked about, and then they understand the technologies and how to mix the technologies together in a way that works for the investor and works for, you know, bringing the carbon goals down. Yeah. So it's doable. What we're doing is doable with others. I think where people probably or other organizations probably get stuck or stop is they always say, well, that's the tenant's problem, or that, you know, the tenant's responsible for that. Yeah. And if I make that improvement, it's not going to show up in my economics. And I'd say that's true, but there are creative structures that you can go through. I mean, CPACE is one, the commercial financing there, but there are other structures that you can do that look like CPACE that are not CPACE that allow you to recover the investment, and the tenant gets the benefit, and so does the investor.
Mm-hmm. I would like to discuss a little bit more the investment side. So when it comes to financing those technologies, can you give us any tips around those? And also, can you give us some overview of whether it's becoming easier to finance those improvements? It's becoming more difficult to find financing. So part of your business is actually trying to cast these technologies that come into the real estate environment, but also the other part is to try to find who finance those technologies to get there beyond your own equity. So can you give us a little bit of prospects of how that part of the real estate investment work for you guys?
Yeah, you know, right now with everything that happened earlier in the year with SVP, I think traditional commercial bank lending is a little kind of stuck. So that's a little bit difficult. You know, hopefully that kind of resolves itself in the next year. CPACE is, I think with the run-up in construction costs, which we are seeing starting to come down, but we're still seeing quotes that are high. It's getting a little bit harder to, if you're looking at the improvement or return on the cost, it's getting a little bit more difficult for some projects to pencil. But again, I think we're going to see those costs coming down. So I think with the commercial loan markets hopefully opening up in the next year or so, that'll be there. What we're also seeing is working with non-traditional funding sources like a KKR or an Apollo to do some kind of a mezzanine type of investment for these projects. And you know, if you sharpen the pencil, you can make these things work.
Awesome.
And I think on the technology side too, you obviously have a lot of headwinds. SVB coming out of the market, they were in I think 60% plus of climate deals before they tanked. So there's definitely a lot of liquidity that got pulled out of the market, but there are also a lot of tailwinds today. So the IRA, the infrastructure bill, et cetera, all pushing a lot of capital towards climate technologies. And I think there's a growing number. It seems like every day there's a new climate fund out there. So there's a lot of dry powder chasing these opportunities too. Some of it is sort of climate tourism, which can be dangerous with regards to valuations and sort of letting things run away before they can be commercially sort of proven and making sure that the market stays rational and that a bubble doesn't emerge. But there's a lot of capital out there seeking these opportunities. And we've seen good companies, even in this environment, raising a ton of money because people want exposure to this industry. On the commercial side, real estate companies and frankly, all companies have set these ESG goals. They've said them publicly, and if they don't meet them, they're going to be, they're going to have egg on their face. So they have to be sort of forward. The climate change and sort of ESG and these, goals that everyone has set doesn't really stop for a recession or sort of capital market availability. I think people understand that. But just lastly, also, we actually have in our most recent fund a new sleeve, which we've just introduced called an infrastructure sleeve or a special sit sleeve, which is helping finance first-of-a-kind technologies because there actually is a gap in the market today where commercial banks won't come down market to fund a first-of-a-kind electrolyzer that takes instead of water, CO2 in. It's a foreign technology. Until it's proven, we're not going to be able to commercially bank it. So we have, once we've done sort of the work on the OpCo side, we actually can come in and do financing for the equipment build out too and the manufacturing scale up, assuming that there's offtake agreements and sort of underlying equipment value. So I think people are being a lot more creative on the capital financing side of things too, because we're starting to see some competition in that space actually.
Fascinating.
One thing I would add, the challenge is so huge that we kind of have to do everything simultaneously. There's no magic bullet solution, and there are kind of three different domains where we desperately need innovation. So one is with design.
Yeah.
And the previous panel talked about design. I think particularly design of communities and architectural design of infrastructure that needs a lot of creative work. The second is public policy. We really need governments to set the rules, and I don't believe market forces alone will ever get us there. Yep. That we need to harness market forces, but through creative public policy, and three, we need to deploy all the technology that we have available. And I think we had meetings with Taurus when they were just starting the Whisper Valley project, and so I think the enlightened developers, can take the ball and run with it. We've launched multiple startups out of our group, so I think, nurturing the entrepreneurship and getting these new ideas to market is really critical, and I believe that there's enough creativity in local governments that we can solve it. I don't have any faith in national or state level governments, but I think mayors and the leadership in community can take the lead.
Mm-hmm. Great. Taurus?
Yeah, I was just going to add one more thing on the investing. I think when you're looking at things like solar, storage, EV charging, any of the HVAC technologies, the more you can standardize the package to give it to the investor so they know what they're looking at, and it's not a snowflake every time they get a project, that helps scale up as well. And so if you can get a portfolio that you go after, doing each property is going to be unique, but if you have a template for what the technology is and you can bring that back in a common structure to the financier, it helps quite a bit.
That's a really good point. And I mean, one of the things, we have a shopping list that we have when we're looking at alternative construction materials. One of them is drop-in replacement. We don't want to have to rely on the change in behavior from anybody if we're going to be asking them to use a different type of cement or something like that, because there are a lot of constituents in the development value chain, which if I learned anything in my program here is that there's just a lot of parties that are involved. Convincing all of them to do something is very difficult, so making it as easy and as painless as possible. So for example, our investment in Brimstone actually makes a cement that is molecularly identical to ordinary Portland cement. So you shouldn't theoretically have to convince anybody really to take a risk on it down the road. It's obviously there's going to be a lot of trials that come with it, but having a drop-in replacement, having something be at cost parity, having the feedstock be widely available, having the manufacturing be scalable, all these things really help on the investment side of things. To be able to make sure that the substitution into the existing ecosystem is as painless as possible, because relying on sort of changes in human behavior, I think over time that's helpful. But if we're going to be pushing forward technology in the near term, reducing friction as much as possible up front is really important.
And I mean, let's not forget that we are running out of time, right? So not only for this session, but it's not that we have 5 decades to do this, right? Like we need to make severe, drastic change as soon as possible, which means that any of these frictions in the value chains are going to introduce years that we just don't have. And that is very important to make sure that we streamline those not only from the business perspective, but also for the climate perspective. If we keep introducing frictions, delays, we are not going to get there to that donut of 2.5 in time. And then we will do it, but nobody will care because we will not be around anymore. One of the things that I would like to close our private session, I've been very mean by getting all of the questions and asking you all of the questions, but we will open up in a minute, is that in your talk, it was very clear that especially when you start touching buildings and infrastructure, while you eat part of the donut in the operational carbon, you create a mini donut or large donut in the embodied carbon. So I know, Clay, you've been very busy with technologies around new construction materials and so forth. Can you give us a little bit of a sense of what is out there in terms of prospect to reduce carbon in embodied carbon, and what is out there coming online soon or already online that people can use in their developments and construction now?
There's a lot out there, and I think the solutions will be different for a lot of different the real estate players. There's not going to be a silver bullet that sort of fixes everything. For single-family homes, it's going to look different from multifamily, from commercial, from industrial. So there's a lot of different options. As I mentioned earlier, Brimstone is our sort of first bet in clean concrete, but I think that there will be more to follow just because concrete is the second most consumed material globally behind water. So it's something that clearly needs to be decarbonized over time. So I think that is one that's important. There are commercially available sort of CO2 cements that consume less CO2 today, but we're talking 5 to 10 to 20% reductions, and our goal is hopefully to get that up to 100, if not more, reduction. So there are options today. Green steel is also, very topical. I think substitutes for timber, I think, are high sort of on the priority list for a lot of our public home builders. But as I said earlier, we're sort of looking at anything so long as we can check our shopping list, which is, sad is drop-in replacement for existing processes. I'm very sort of biased towards that, so that you don't have to convince, the trades to take something on. You don't have to convince the developer to take something on, the financer, the investor, the consumer of the ultimate product. If it's as similar as you can be to the existing material today, I think that's going to be the path of least resistance. Cost parity, scalability, availability of feedstock, and then I think last, which is going back to what we were talking about on sort of the financial capital market side of things, is just a bankable business. So we're sort of agnostic across all of the different building materials that are out there right now. We're looking at all of them, but we kind of have to check everything in that shopping list.
Excellent. This is a great way to open the floor for questions. Remember, that is the very last chance that you guys have to talk. So use it. You will regret if not.
Thank you so much. I really love the conversation, but I want to talk about the framing the question. Right now we are carbonizing, but actually for consumer, difficult to understand what I mean. I want to share my thoughts if I could. I'm actually a hospitality college professor at UNLV. We talk about fun economics. We talk about hospitality. people are very happy to work in that environment. Residents are happy. So my question to Claire, when you change your thing from real estate tech, prop tech to climate tech, would you ever consider become hospitality technology? Something people easy to connect. I feel every time you talk about decarbonizing, you're calculating all the numbers. The consumer doesn't get it. I don't know how much water I use every day. But if you tell me how much happy I could be with my family, with my employee, what's the employee productivity, understand that. Because I can easily do survey to understand that. But when you tell me how much reduce my carbon footprint, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's my question. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
So is the question just, okay.
Very clear, targeted.
So we actually do have investments in a lot of companies that sell into hospitality. There's, as I said, we have over 3 million hospitality units in our LP base. I think a lot of the solutions that work for hospitality also work for multifamily. So there's a lot of different ways to sort of attack it. The move from prop tech to climate tech was really because our LPs asked us to move into climate tech. They were looking for decarbonization tech specifically so that they could meet their ESG goals. And I think sort of a departure from, into a third strategy would probably come from demand from the LPs. So, would love to, talk to any of the hospitality folks that you are talking to figure out what exactly kind of technologies you guys would like to see. We did have a fund of one at some point focused on retail because we had retail LPs that were trying to figure out what technologies would help them navigate the unique disruption that was happening to retail in sort of the late 2010s. But obviously, our commercial LPs, our residential LPs, et cetera, didn't want overexposure to that. So we ended up raising that money just from retail LPs. So there could be a potential for a hospitality fund. But, I think at the end of the day, all of our LPs are economic animals, and they're going to want to have investments in technologies that have, clear, demonstrable ROI. And so that means, having something on their platform that can add ancillary revenue or reduce costs, or on the financial side, be a good investment that can generate a, outsized return.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm going to go a slightly different direction. I'm founder of a startup that does software to make embodied carbon visible across the chain. And I have a question for Eric and Clay, because a lot of what you talked about in terms of operational carbon is really about upfront cost, and then you recuperate that over a number of years. But of course, the dynamics looks quite different with embodied carbon in terms of incentives. So can you just talk a little bit, maybe Eric, particularly you, in terms of how you're thinking embodied carbon into that real estate strategy, either in retrofits or in new build?
Yeah, it's a great question. I can say in Germany, we have logistics warehousing that has quite a bit of timber in it. So we already have been moving in that direction. I will admit, it's still very early days right now for the embodied carbon piece. What we are starting to look at is if we were to clear a property to build something new, then we can look what the embodied carbon would be with the traditional materials versus we take that same property, it could be like the 1970s vintage example, and even with traditional materials, you can show that it's a better path in terms of operational plus embodied. So we're looking at a number of the technologies, including some of the ones that were just discussed earlier on cement and steel. I think the first part is just being aware of the trade-off between the new build versus the renovation and what the carbon budget is that you're trying to solve for, and then looking for ways to source materials that are lower carbon. We do have one property that we're looking at. It's a new build in Nashville, and we are looking at possibly lower carbon cement.
And I guess just to add to that, windows are a really good example of something that are quite inefficient, especially in older buildings, but incredibly difficult to retrofit, and the ROI is really difficult to pencil. Where we're actually seeing a lot of the innovation getting pushed, or at least I am, is actually on the single family front. Because if you think about a single-family home builder putting out 50,000 homes a year, taking a risk of new technology on 1 or 2 or 3, 4 homes a year is actually a small piece of the pie for them. And if something goes horribly wrong, at the end of the day, it's a $300,000 structure that they can take down and they don't have to sell it. Whereas if you're building a commercial office building, it's a $10+ million building, your appetite for risk is going to be much lower for that. And so the innovation that we're seeing sort of on the larger scale buildings is less than what we're seeing on the really smaller scale. And so we're actually working mostly, frankly, with our subscale multifamily and single family LPs to really explore and push innovation there. And then hopefully that will go up the chain into larger buildings once sort of the proof of concept is there and that becomes more attractive on the commercial level and bankable.
I'll just add prefab buildings. We're looking at and talking to a couple of players. That's one way, just reducing waste. Even if you're using traditional construction materials, you reduce the waste. There's obviously a lot of waste in traditional construction.
Firstly, this was a phenomenal panel. I mean, you've brought down the concepts into very real, discretely quantified form, and this has been very productive for me. A few months ago, the Department of Energy cited some research that showed we always knew that it takes less energy and less of a carbon footprint to cool dry air. It takes more energy to cool wet air. Mm-hmm. And so they cited research in March, very recent research, that showed that up to half of the carbon footprint and almost as much of the cost of cooling doesn't go to cool, it goes to dehumidify.
Yeah.
You saw that.
Yep.
Selfishly, my company has a number of patents for a technology that does just that. But I'm wondering, you're the first person I've ever heard actually knows about that research. I was wondering how you might integrate that into what you're doing, because that seems to me to be, again selfishly, the lowest possible hanging fruit for a retrofit.
What a coincidence. What a coincidence.
Well, yeah.
Are you
We'll
guys
talk
sweating?
afterwards. Sorry?
Are you guys sweating?
We
Very drier here.
Yeah, it's so we've looked at it. We have some people on our team that know about that kind of technology. I'd say it's one of those, even with the lower carbon materials, we want to study it and we want to make sure it's ready to be scaled out. We're willing to pilot these kind of things. Given where we're building, Florida, Texas, very high dew point locations, it's an area that we'd be very interested to explore. How do we reduce the cooling load? So the answer is we're looking at it, but we're not currently using it.
Great discussion, by the way. I was just curious, you guys mentioned low-hanging fruit and zoning was one of the areas. I'm thinking, have you guys seen any good examples of business model innovations that could help reduce the carbon footprint? So for example, I'm thinking work from home has led to a lot of people not coming to the office space. So now we have commercial real estate buildings that are potentially sitting empty. So have you seen any good examples of business model innovations that have led to better outcomes for climate?
I guess just to start, I think one innovation that will come sort of on the transportation and mobility side of things is actually going to be an increase in sort of leasing of vehicles instead of owning vehicles. I think given where sort of battery technology is today, I think we can all acknowledge that batteries in 5 years are going to be better than they are today. So I think there will be a gradual shift towards more leasing of vehicles. I don't know what that does on the sort of footprint for vehicles, but I do think that it'll help with the adoption of vehicles because hopefully, with more financing available, people will be able to buy more more electric vehicles and sort of advance the electrification of the fleet. Offsetting that, though, is obviously that cars being built today are lasting far longer than they were 20 years ago, and so I think that the fleet itself is just going to grow, and the average age of the car on the road today I think is above 10 years now, and so that I think is going to be sort of an offset to that. But just I think on the business model front, on the venture side of things, we're actually seeing a lot of venture companies back asset-intensive, hardware-intensive businesses, which I think is very different from where we were seeing sort of in the first wave of venture, which was pure software. How scalable can it be? How quickly can you get there? I would say 60 to 70% of our portfolio actually has some degree of asset intensity in it.
I think with one area that I think is low-hanging fruit in multifamily housing is allowing people to have a very high quality of life and good functionality in an apartment in much less space. I think the metrics for buildings shouldn't be, in terms of energy consumption, shouldn't be per square foot, it should be per person. Mm-hmm. So if you can take a 200 square foot, or a building that conventionally would accommodate 200 people, and fit 300 people in it, and in the process improve their quality of life. And for example, a simple thing that we're doing is in a studio apartment, the bed takes up, a huge amount of the space. You make the bed disappear, then people have a larger living space. Or, a bedroom that's not used during the day and a living room that's not used in the night, have a single space that dynamically converts from one use to the other. And by doing that, you dramatically reduce the carbon, embodied carbon, you dramatically reduce the use energy, you increase the return on investment for a developer. And what we're finding, particularly young people love this. It's sort of this magical transformation, so you're increasing the quality of life.
Absolutely.
I mean, one of the things that I saw at Shell was co-locating where you live, where you work, and then data centers. And particularly in northern climates, you think of data centers, all the heat rejection, and taking advantage of that heat rejection and using that in a community heating loop. So there's some interesting models there where you can put different types of loads together, and you avoid the commuting as well.
One other, not to answer the question twice, but that I'm excited about actually is electrification as a service. And so actually in like long haul trucking, for example, there are companies now that will electrify a beneficial cargo owner's route from, say, Savannah to Atlanta, and they'll install EV charging networks along the way so that they have, they have infrastructure to support the loads, but they can do it as a service now. So they can electrify routes for people, and so that extends across trucking, but it also extends across other forms of transportation as well. And I actually think that one's really interesting. This sort of concept of electrification as a service across a lot of these different industries that are otherwise going to be really difficult to electrify.
Excellent. We have time for the very
just the last question right?
of the forum.
Yes, last question.
In addition to making buildings more energy efficient, reducing their carbon footprint, is there research in making the walls, exterior walls, and the building itself with carbon absorbing materials?
Well, yesterday we had Randy from the CS Hub showing some of that research already. He has a lot of that. He didn't apply to buildings itself, but concrete absorbs CO2. They were doing it for different purposes, but actually now that we are fighting against CO2 emissions, he had the numbers there. Around 20% will be absorbed back from those buildings. I don't know whether you guys have any other specific technology that we apply to buildings, but we have the video. That's a good point. We have the video, so you can actually rewatch the session yesterday where he was talking about that. And with that, I think that we would like to thank Eric, Clay, Ken for a fantastic panel, and all of you.
So we survived an in-person World Real Estate Forum. I hope you are all just as relieved as I am that we actually, hopefully, the kind of energy, the kind of conversation that we've had in the last day and a half has been inspiring to all of you. I think what we strive here is not to do the same topics in the usual way, but to take a twist in it that actually, hopefully, you can get a sense of the perspective that we bring to this from MIT, from the Center for Real Estate in particular. And we would like your feedback on what are the things that actually that inspired you and that the direction that we might take, because we do intend to continue doing this. We like seeing you. I hope you like seeing us. We'd love to host you in person at MIT. Now, I told you before that we were quite worried. We were worried that this forum couldn't be revived, and it couldn't have been done without a lot of people who have been really behind the scenes. Of course, the panelists, the moderators have been incredible. But you know that the Center for Real Estate is not quite like any other academic program or center at the Institute. It's not subsidized. So I want to first and foremost acknowledge that the many partners that we have at the center who have helped us be able to pursue this area, which is both scholarly and applied and professional. Now, there are 21 current partners that we have, and I want to acknowledge them. AEW Capital Management, Boston Properties, although they're now BXP, Car Properties, Climate Alpha, Colliers, EY, FM Global, Goodwin, InvestorBridge, JLL, Leesman, Majib Al Futtaim, Moody Analytics, Prologis, Paul Clayton, Bob White, Rizia, Taurus, TA Realty, Veris Residential, and Willow. Now, if you're interested in joining the center membership, Denise DeLore and James Scott are here. We have a series of printed out agreements that you can sign right here. So don't be shy. Now, this year, we started the conference by doing a handoff between Steve and the new team that you saw front of house. But this conference could not have been done without the staff that have actually been virtually invisible. But I think that we need to acknowledge them here today. Lacey Cochran, Bettina Ucholi, Karina Urez, Kelly Cameron, Mary Hughes, Joanne McHugh, Zhen Tan, and of course, we are ably guided intellectually by our faculty director, Professor Xiqi Zhang. Now, we're not going to have a contest of letting you vote on who will be the next host next year. But I think you would all agree with me that my co-hosts for this year, Denise DeLore and James Scott, really deserve a lot of credit for making sure that this thing went on time. I want to thank you. I want to thank, again, the panelists. I want to thank all of you to have come from a long way away, and we hope that we can continue to exceed your expectations as we return and reconvene. So with that, thank you, and see you next year. Thank you.